An old lady with sharp eyes, Miss Marple, steps into a grand mansion to solve a mystery. Where is young Edward Grayson? A clever detective, Victor Steele, thinks like Sherlock Holmes, chasing clues like letters and footprints. But Miss Marple sees secrets in nervous smiles and hidden letters, unraveling a lie that Edward never left. He's trapped in the house. With her village wisdom, she outsmarts Steele, saves Edward, and proves the heart sees what logic misses. Dive into this thrilling tale of wits and truth. Chapter 1. The mysterious invitation. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cosy parlour in St. Mary Mead, her knitting needles clicking softly. The fire crackled, casting a warm glow on her neat little home. At 70-something, with snowy hair tucked under a lace cap, she looked like any kind old lady, but her sharp blue eyes missed nothing. She loved her quiet village life, sipping tea, tending roses, and chatting with neighbours. Yet her mind was always busy, piecing together puzzles from the gossip she heard, like who stole Mrs. Baker's apples or why young Tom looked so nervous last Sunday. On this chilly October morning, a letter lay on her table, its thick cream paper sealed with red wax. It wasn't the usual note from her nephew Raymond or her friend Dolly. The postmark read London, and the handwriting was bold, unfamiliar. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her curiosity tingling. She slit the envelope with a silver letter opener and unfolded the crisp page. "Dear Miss Marple," it began, "your reputation as a solver of mysteries has reached us. We invite you to Hawthorne Hall, a grand estate in London, for a unique challenge. A baffling case awaits, one that has puzzled even the greatest minds, including those inspired by Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Will you join us on November 1st? A car will collect you at 10 a.m. Yours sincerely, Sir Henry Grayson." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose. Sherlock Holmes! She'd read his stories, admiring his clever tricks with fingerprints and cigar ash. But she always thought he missed something. People's hearts, their secrets, the little lies they told themselves. Still, a challenge against a Holmes-like detective. Her fingers tapped the armrest. "Well, well," she murmured, "this is unexpected." She sipped her tea, thinking. Hawthorne Hall sounded grand, not like her simple cottage with its creaky stairs and rose-patterned curtains. And Sir Henry Grayson, who was he? She recalled a snippet from the village postmistress, a rich man fond of puzzles, who owned a big house full of odd treasures. The mention of Sherlock Holmes intrigued her most. Was the great detective himself involved, or someone copying his style? Either way, it promised excitement. Miss Marple glanced at her clock. It was only 9 a.m., but her mind was already racing. She pictured herself at Hawthorne Hall, surrounded by strangers, listening to their chatter. People always revealed more than they meant to, especially when they thought nobody was watching. That's where she was different from Holmes. He hunted clues in dirt or scraps of paper. She found them in a nervous laugh, a quick glance, or a story that didn't quite add up. She stood smoothing her tweed skirt and crossed to her bookshelf. Pulling out a worn copy of The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, she flipped through it. A Study in Scarlet, The Speckled Band, such clever tales. Yet she wondered if Holmes ever noticed the maid who blushed when the master spoke, or the vicar who fidgeted with his watch. Those were the threads she followed, like the yarn in her knitting, until they wove a clear picture. Setting the book down, Miss Marple decided. She'd go, not to prove herself smarter than Holmes, but because a mystery was like a knot. She couldn't resist untangling it. Besides, a trip to London would be a nice change. She'd pack her best shawl and her sharpest wits. The next few days passed in a flurry. Miss Marple told her maid, Lily, she'd be away for a week. Lily, a rosy-cheeked girl, gasped, "London, miss, all by yourself? What if it's dangerous?" Miss Marple chuckled. "My dear, I've faced worse than a train ride. I'll be fine." She packed a small suitcase, her black dress, a warm cardigan, and her favourite tea blend, just in case London's tea was weak. On November the 1st, she woke early, her heart fluttering with excitement. She ate a boiled egg and toast, then checked her reflection in the hall mirror. Her lace cap was straight, her coat buttoned neatly. "Not bad for an old spinster," she said with a twinkle. At exactly 10 a.m., a sleek black car purred up to her gate. The driver, a young man in a crisp uniform, tipped his cap. "Miss Marple, for Hawthorne Hall, ma'am." She nodded, clutching her suitcase, and settled into the plush seat. The car glided through St. Mary Mead's sleepy lanes, past the church and the post office, then onto the main road. Fields gave way to bustling towns, and soon London's smoky skyline loomed. Miss Marple watched the city unfold. Tall buildings, honking cabs, people rushing like ants. It was noisier than her village, but people were the same everywhere, she thought, full of hopes, fears, and secrets. The car turned into a quiet street lined with grand houses. Hawthorne Hall stood at the end, its stone walls draped in ivy, its windows gleaming like eyes. It looked old but proud, with towers at each corner and a heavy oak door. The driver opened her door, and Miss Marple stepped out, her sensible shoes crunching on gravel. A butler, tall and stern, greeted her. "Miss Marple, this way, please." She followed him into a vast hall. Marble floors shone under a glittering chandelier. Paintings of grim-faced men in wigs lined the walls, and a staircase curved upward like a ribbon. The air smelled of polish and old wood. The butler led her to a drawing-room, where a fire roared in a massive hearth. "Sir Henry will join you soon," he said, bowing out. Miss Marple sat on a velvet sofa, her hands folded in her lap. She scanned the room. A ticking grandfather clock, a silver tea set, a vase of roses. Everything was perfect, yet she sensed a hidden tension, like a thread pulled too tight. Her eyes caught a photograph on the mantel. A young man with a shy smile. She wondered who he was. Footsteps echoed, and Sir Henry Grayson entered. He was a stout man in his 60s, with a red face and a booming voice. "Miss Marple, delighted you're here," he said, shaking her hand. His eyes twinkled, but she noticed a flicker of worry. "I hope the journey wasn't too tiring." "No, at all," she said, smiling. "Your home is lovely." He waved a hand. "Old pile full of drafts, but it's perfect for our little game." He sat across from her, leaning forward. "You're wondering about the challenge, eh? Well, it's a mystery, a real corker. I've invited 2 detectives to solve it. You and, well, a chap who fancies himself a modern Sherlock Holmes." Miss Marple tilted her head. "A modern Sherlock? How interesting." Sir Henry chuckled. "Name's Mr. Victor Steele. Brilliant fellow. Loves his gadgets and logic. But I've heard you've got a knack for puzzles too. Different sort, maybe. Thought it'd be fun to see who cracks it first." She nodded, her face calm, but her mind buzzing. Victor Steele sounded confident, like Holmes. She'd met men like that, sure they knew everything. But often they overlooked the small things, the human things. "What's the mystery?" she asked. Sir Henry's smile faded. "Not yet, my dear. Tonight at dinner I'll lay it all out. For now, rest. You'll meet Mr. Steele and the others soon." He stood, clapping his hands. "Mrs. Poole, my housekeeper, will show you to your room." A plump woman in a black dress appeared, her face kind but tired. "This way, miss," she said. Miss Marple followed her up the grand staircase, down a long hall lined with doors. Her room was charming. A four-poster bed, a window overlooking gardens, and a fire already lit. "Dinner's at 7, Mrs. Poole said, curtsying. Alone, Miss Marple unpacked, hanging her dress in the wardrobe. She sat by the window, watching dusk settle over the estate. Lights twinkled in the distance, and an owl hooted. She thought about Sir Henry's words. A mystery, a challenge, a modern Sherlock. She wasn't here to outshine anyone, but she couldn't help feeling a quiet thrill. Mysteries were her joy, and she was good at them. She freshened up, pinning her lace cap neatly, and checked the clock. 6:45 p.m., time to head downstairs. As she stepped into the hall, she heard voices below. Sir Henry's laugh and a sharp, crisp voice replying. Mr. Steele, perhaps. Her lips curved in a small smile. She'd listen, watch, and wait. People always showed their true selves, sooner or later. Descending the staircase, she felt the weight of the old house around her. Hawthorne Hall held secrets, she was sure. The photograph of the young man lingered in her mind. Was he part of the mystery? She reached the dining room, where a long table gleamed with silver and crystal. Sir Henry stood by the fire, talking to a tall man in a sleek suit. The man's dark eyes flicked to her, sharp as a hawk's. Miss Marple, Sir Henry called. Come meet Mr. Victor Steele. Steele bowed slightly, his smile polite but cool. A pleasure, he said, his voice smooth. I hear you're fond of mysteries. I enjoy a good puzzle, she said mildly, her eyes meeting his. He was young, maybe 40, with a clever face and a hint of pride. Like Holmes, she thought, all brain, but perhaps not enough heart. Dinner's ready, Sir Henry announced. Other guests appeared, family members perhaps, or friends. Miss Marple noted their faces. A nervous young woman, an older man with a scowl, a maid who moved, too quietly. She took her seat, her knitting bag at her feet, ready to listen. As the soup was served, Sir Henry tapped his glass. Friends, he said, tonight we begin a grand adventure. A mystery awaits, one that'll test the sharpest minds. His eyes flicked to Miss Marple and Steele. Tomorrow I'll share the details. For now, enjoy. Miss Marple sipped, her soup, her ears open. Steele asked Sir Henry about the estate's history, his questions precise. The young woman fidgeted with her napkin. The older man muttered about the weather. Small things, but they told a story. She felt a prickle of excitement. The game had begun. Chapter 2. The Case of the Vanishing. Ere Miss Marple sat at the long dining table in Hawthorne Hall, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The room sparkled with candlelight, bouncing off silver spoons and crystal glasses. The air smelled of roast, beef and warm bread. But beneath the chatter of the guests, she felt a hum of secrets. Sir Henry Grayson, the host, stood at the head of the table, his red face glowing with excitement. Across from her sat Mr. Victor Steele, the sharp-eyed detective, who reminded her of Sherlock Holmes. His suit was crisp, his smile tight, like he already knew the answers, but Miss Marple knew better. Answers hid in the smallest things, like a dropped word or a nervous glance. The other guests were a mixed bunch. There was Clara, a young woman with pale cheeks who kept twisting her napkin. Next to her sat Mr. Rowland, an older man with a sour face and bushy eyebrows. A quiet maid, Ellen, moved around the table, her eyes down but her steps quick. Miss Marple noticed everything. The way Clara avoided Mr. Rowland's gaze, the way Ellen's hands shook when she poured wine. People always told stories without meaning to. Sir Henry cleared his throat, tapping his glass with a spoon. The room fell quiet. "Friends," he said, his voice booming, "it's time to share the mystery. It's a real puzzle, one that's stumped the police and left us all worried. I've brought Miss Marple and Mr. Steele here to solve it." He paused, his eyes flicking to the photograph on the mantel, the young man with the shy smile Miss Marple had noticed earlier. "My nephew, Edward Grayson," Sir Henry said, pointing to the picture. "He's 25, heir to this estate. 3 weeks ago, he vanished. Poof, gone without a word. The police found a few clues, a torn letter, a locked diary, and a single glove, but they're no closer to finding him. I need answers. Is he alive? Did he run off, or worse?" Gasp rippled through the room. Clara's napkin fell to the floor, and she bent to pick it up, her face even paler. Mr. Rowland grunted, muttering something about foolish boys. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. She didn't say a word, but her mind was already threading clues together, like yarn in her knitting. Sir Henry turned to Victor Steele. "Mr. Steele, you've got a reputation for cracking tough cases. What do you think?" Steele leaned back, his fingers steepled like a professor. "A missing heir suggests motive," he said, his voice smooth and sure. "Kidnapping, perhaps, for ransom. Or he fled to escape trouble, debts maybe, or a scandal. The torn letter and glove are key. I'll need to see them, along with any footprints or traces near where he was last seen. Facts will lead us to him." Sir Henry nodded, impressed. "And you, Miss Marple? Any thoughts?" Miss Marple smiled, her voice soft. "It's early to say, Sir Henry. But people don't vanish without reason. I'd like to know more about Edward, his habits, his friends, what made him happy or afraid. Sometimes the smallest things tell the biggest stories." Steele's lips twitched, like he thought her words were quaint. "Interesting," he said, "but evidence is what solves. Cases, papers, prints, facts, not feelings." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but she said nothing. She'd met men like Steele before, so sure their way was the only way. In her village, St. Mary Mead, she'd solved mysteries by listening to gossip and watching faces. A torn letter was useful, but a shaky voice or a hidden frown told her more. Sir Henry clapped his hands. "Wonderful! You'll both have full access to the estate and the clues. Start tomorrow. For now, let's eat." The meal continued with chatter about the weather and London news. Miss Marple listened, her spoon moving slowly through her soup. Clara spoke little, her eyes darting to the mantel's photograph. Duh! Roland complained about the roast, his voice sharp. Ellen, the maid, spilled a drop of wine and apologized too quickly. Miss Marple stored it all away, like buttons in a tin. After dinner, the guests moved to the drawing-room for coffee. Steele excused himself, saying he wanted to examine the grounds before dark. "Footprints don't wait," he said, pulling on a coat. Miss Marple stayed, settling into a plush chair by the fire. She took out her knitting, the needles clicking softly. It helped her think, and it made people forget she was watching. Clara sat nearby, staring into her coffee cup. Miss Marple smiled at her. "You must be fond of Edward," she said gently. "He looks kind in that photograph." Clara started, her cup rattling. "Oh, yes, he's my cousin. We grew up together. He's good-hearted." Her voice wobbled and she looked away. Miss Marple nodded, her needles moving. "It's hard when someone you care about disappears. Did he seem worried before he left?" Clara hesitated. "He was quiet lately, not himself, but he didn't say why." She stood quickly, excusing herself. Miss Marple watched her go, noting the way her hands twisted together. Mr. Roland passed by, his scowl deeper. "Waste of time, this detective nonsense," he muttered. "Boy probably ran off with some girl." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Perhaps," she said. "Do you think he had a sweetheart?" Roland snorted. "Who knows? Young people these days foolish." He stomped off, leaving a cloud of cigar smoke. Miss Marple knitted on, her mind busy. Clara's nervousness, Roland's grumpiness. They weren't just quirks. Something was off, like a stitch dropped in a scarf. She thought of a case back in St. Mary Mead, when a grocer's wife vanished. Everyone thought she'd run away, but Miss Marple noticed her sister's guilty eyes. Sure enough, the sister knew more than she'd let on. People were the same everywhere, even in a grand place like Hawthorne Hall. The clock struck 9, and Sir Henry suggested everyone retire early. "Big day tomorrow," he said. Miss Marple agreed, tucking her knitting into her bag. As she climbed the staircase to her room, she heard footsteps outside, Steele no doubt, prowling the grounds. She smiled. He'd find his clues, but she'd find hers in the morning. In her room, she lit a candle and sat by the window. The gardens below were dark, but she saw a faint light moving. Steele's flashlight, probably. She wondered what he'd find. A footprint, a scrap of cloth. Useful, but not enough. Edward's disappearance wasn't just about things left behind. It was about why he left, or if he hadn't left at all. She opened her suitcase and pulled out a small notebook. In neat handwriting, she jotted down what she'd seen. Clara's shaky voice, Roland's bitterness, Ellen's trembling hands. She added a note about the photograph, Edward's shy smile. Was he running from something, or was someone hiding him? She closed the notebook, her mind spinning like a wheel. Slipping into her nightgown, she thought of Sherlock Holmes. In his stories, he'd solve this with a magnifying glass and a clever trick. But Miss Marple knew mysteries weren't always so tidy. People lied, hid things, or didn't even know what they knew. She'd learned that in her village, watching neighbours over tea. A girl's blush, a man's quick temper. Those were her magnifying glass. She climbed into the big bed, the sheets cool and crisp. The fire in her room had died to embers, casting soft shadows. She felt a quiet thrill, the same she always felt when a puzzle began to form. Tomorrow she'd talk to more people. Mrs. Poole, the housekeeper, or maybe the gardener. Servants saw everything, even if they didn't know it. As she drifted towards sleep, she pictured Edward's face from the photograph. Where was he? Was he scared? Or was he clever, hiding for a reason? And what about the torn letter, the locked diary, the glove? Steele would chase those, she knew. But she'd chase the people, their words, their silences, their secrets. A creak outside her door made her eyes snap open. She lay still, listening. Another creak, then silence, just the old house settling, or someone moving in the dark. She smiled faintly. Hawthorne Hall was full of mysteries, and she was ready to unravel them. Chapter 3. Clues and Conversations. Miss Marple woke early, the pale light of dawn slipping through the heavy curtains of her room at Hawthorne Hall. The air was chilly, and the big house creaked like an old ship. She lay still for a moment, listening. A bird chirped outside, and faint footsteps echoed below. Servants starting their day, perhaps. Her mind was already turning, piecing together the puzzle of Edward Grayson's disappearance. The torn letter, the locked diary, the single glove, they were important. But the people she'd met last night were the real clues. Clara's nervous hands, Mr. Rowland's sharp tongue, Ellen the maid's quick apologies. They all told a story. Could you name? Rose, slipping on her warm cardigan and pinning her lace cap neatly. After a quick breakfast of tea and toast, brought by a shy housemaid, she decided to explore. Victor Steele, the Holmes-like detective, would be hunting for footprints or scraps. Of paper, she guessed. Let him. She'd find her answers in the chatter of the household. The little things people didn't think mattered. Miss Marple stepped into the hallway, her sensible shoes quiet on the polished floor. The house was grand but felt heavy, like it held too many secrets. She made her way downstairs, passing portraits of stern-faced Graysons staring from the walls. In the entrance hall, she spotted Mrs. Poole, the housekeeper, polishing a silver candlestick. The woman's round face was kind, but her eyes looked tired, like she hadn't slept well. "Good morning, Mrs. Poole," Miss Marple said, smiling. "You must be busy keeping this big house in order." Mrs. Poole started, nearly dropping the candlestick. "Oh, Miss Marple? Yes, it's a lot of work, but we manage." Her voice was warm but shaky, and she rubbed her hands on her apron. Marple nodded, her eyes gentle. "It's a lovely home. Did Edward enjoy living here? He seems a nice young man from his picture." Mrs. Poole's face softened. "Oh, Master Edward was a dear, always kind to us servants, not like some." She glanced down the hall as if checking for listeners. "He'd sit in the kitchen sometimes, chatting about books or the garden, but lately he was quiet, worried maybe." "Worried?" Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice soft as a feather. "Did he say why?" "Mrs." Poole hesitated, her fingers twisting the cloth. "Not exactly. Just he'd pace the halls at night. I heard him once, muttering about promises and debts. I didn't ask, it's not my place." She looked guilty, like she'd said too much. Miss Marple smiled reassuringly. "You've a sharp ear, Mrs. Poole. That's helpful." She patted the housekeeper's arm and moved on, her mind storing the words like beads on a string. Edward, pacing, talking of debts. It reminded her of a young man in St. Mary Mead who'd run off after borrowing money he couldn't repay. But was Edward running, or was something else at play? She stepped outside into the gardens where frost sparkled on the grass. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and roses. In the distance, she saw Victor Steele crouched near a hedge, his coat flapping as he examined the ground with a small magnifying glass. His face was focused, like a hound sniffing a trail. Miss Marple smiled faintly. He was thorough. She'd give him that. She strolled along a gravel path, her eyes scanning the flower beds. A gardener, an older man with a weathered face, was clipping roses. His hands moved slowly, like he was thinking hard. Miss Marple approached, her smile warm. "Good morning. Those roses are lovely. Do you tend them yourself?" The gardener looked up, his eyes squinting. "Aye, miss. Been here 30 years. Roses are my pride." He paused, wiping his brow. "You one of them detectives?" Miss Marple chuckled. "I just like to understand things. I'm Jane Marple. Did you know Edward Grayson well?" The gardener, Tom, he said his name was, nodded. Young Master Edward loved the gardens. He'd sit on that bench there, reading or talking. With Miss Clara, nice lad, always said thank you. His face clouded. Haven't seen him in weeks. Odd that. Odd how? Miss Marple asked, her voice gentle. Tom scratched his chin. He was here the day before he vanished. Looked jumpy, kept looking over his shoulder. Said something about needing to fix things. I thought he meant the roses. He was fussy about 'em. But now I wonder. Miss Marple nodded, her mind clicking like her knitting needles. Thank you, Tom. You've a good memory. She left him to his work, her thoughts spinning. Edward, worried, talking of fixing things, debts, promises, fear. The pieces were small, but they were starting to fit. She wandered toward the village nearby, a short walk from the estate. The air was alive with the clatter of carts and the chatter of shopkeepers. Miss Marple found the post office, a tiny shop with a bell that jingled as she entered. The postmistress, a plump woman with grey curls, looked up from sorting letters. "Morning, love. You're not from here, are you?" "No, I'm visiting," Miss Marple said, smiling. "I'm staying at Hawthorne Hall. Such a grand place. I hear Edward Grayson's gone missing. Everyone must be talking about it." The postmistress leaned forward, her eyes bright with gossip. "Oh, aye, poor lad. Everyone liked Edward, always polite, sending letters for his uncle. But he was odd lately. Posted a letter to London, thick one, a week before he vanished. Looked nervous, kept checking the door." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. "A letter? That's interesting. Did he say who it was for?" "No, but it was fancy paper, sealed tight. I reckoned it was important." The postmistress lowered her voice. "Some say he ran off with a girl. Others think, well, something bad happened. That family's got secrets, mark my words." Miss Marple thanked her and bought a postcard to keep up appearances. As she stepped back into the chilly air, her mind raced. A letter to London. Edward's nerves, the family's secrets. It was like a tangle of yarn. But she was starting to see the pattern. Back at the estate, she found Sir Henry in the library, a grand room lined with books and smelling of leather. He was pacing, his face worried. "Miss Marple, any luck?" he asked. "It's early days," she said, her voice mild. "But I'm learning about Edward. He sounds like a kind young man." Sir Henry sighed, sinking into a chair. "He is. My sister's boy. Raised here after she passed. He's the heir, you know. This place will be his one day, if we find him." His voice cracked, and Miss Marple saw real pain in his eyes. She patted his hand. "We'll do our best, Sir Henry." She glanced at the desk, where a few papers lay scattered. One caught her eye, a bill with red ink marked overdue. She didn't mention it, but her mind tucked it away. As she left the library, she saw Steele striding across the lawn, a notebook in hand. He spotted her and waved her over. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice crisp, "I've found something." Footprints near the back gate, leading to the road. Men's boots, size 10, fresh, enough to be Edward's, and this. He held up a tiny scrap of paper, torn at the edges with a single word. "Meet." Miss Marple peered at it, her eyes sharp. "Very interesting, Mr. Steele. Where was it?" "Caught in the hedge," he said, proud. "Matches the torn letter," Sir Henry mentioned. "I suspect Edward arranged a secret meeting, maybe with a creditor or a rival. I'm heading to the village to check for witnesses." She nodded, her face polite. "Good work. I'll keep talking to the household." She didn't say what she thought, that the paper felt too neat, like it was meant to be found. Steele tipped his hat and marched off, his steps full of purpose. Miss Marple returned to the house, her mind buzzing. Steele's clues were solid, but they were only part of the story. She thought of Clara's pale face, Mrs. Poole's shaky voice, Tom's tale of Edward's jumpiness, and that letter to London. What was in it? She remembered a case in St. Mary Mead, where a missing girl left a note that wasn't hers. Someone had wanted people to think she'd run away. Was this the same? She sat in the drawing-room, her knitting in her lap. The fire crackled, and she watched the flames, her thoughts weaving. Edward was scared, in debt, maybe hiding something. The family wasn't telling everything. Clara's nerves, Roland's anger, even Sir Henry's worry felt heavy. She needed more threads to pull. As the afternoon faded, Ellen the maid brought tea. Miss Marple smiled. "Thank you, dear. You must hear a lot working here. Did Edward ever talk to you?" Ellen blushed, setting the tray down. "Not much, miss. He was kind, though. Gave me a book once, said I'd like it." Her voice dropped. "I heard him arguing with Mr. Roland one night about money. Mr. Roland was cross. Miss Marple's." Needles paused. "Money! That's useful, Ellen. Thank you." The maid scurried off, and Miss Marple leaned back, her mind sharp. An argument, a letter, a torn note. The puzzle was growing, and she was ready to find the next piece. Chapter 4. The Locked Diary. Puzzle Miss Marple sat in the library of Hawthorne Hall, sunlight streaming through tall windows onto rows of leather-bound books. The air smelled of dust and old paper, and a faint ticking came from a clock on the mantel. Her knitting rested in her lap, but her sharp blue eyes were fixed on Victor Steele, who stood at a heavy oak desk, holding a small leather diary. It was Edward Grayson's, one of the clues Sir Henry had mentioned, the locked diary found in Edward's room after he vanished. Steele's face was lit with excitement, like a boy who'd found a hidden treasure. "Got it," Steele said, his voice sharp with triumph. He held up a tiny key, glinting in the light. "Found this taped under Edward's desk drawer. Clever hiding spot, but not clever enough." He inserted the key into the diary's lock, and with a soft click it opened. Sir Henry, standing nearby, leaned forward, his face eager. Clara, the nervous young woman, hovered by the door, her hands twisting. Mr. Rowland, the grumpy uncle, sat in a corner, puffing a cigar and looking bored. Miss Marple watched quietly, her needles still. Steele's quick hands and sharp mind reminded her of Sherlock Holmes in those stories she'd read. He was good at finding things, keys, footprints, scraps of paper. But she wondered if he saw the people around him, their small tells, Clara's pale face, Rowland's tight jaw. Those were clues, too. Steele flipped through the diary, his eyes scanning the pages. "Listen to this," he said, reading aloud. "October 5th, met her again. She's all I think about, but it's risky. If they find out, I'm done." And here, October 7th. "The deal's falling apart. I owe too much. No way out." Sir Henry gasped. "Her? A girl? And a deal? Debts, you think?" Steele nodded, his smile confident. Classic motive. Edward was in love, probably with someone the family didn't approve of. And this deal sounds like a business venture gone wrong, or maybe gambling debts. He likely ran off to avoid scandal or creditors. The torn letter and glove I found yesterday support this. He was planning to meet someone, maybe to escape. Miss Marple tilted her head, her face calm, but her mind racing. The diary's words were juicy, like gossip in St. Mary Mead. But something felt off, like a sweater with a loose stitch. "Shode," spoke softly. "May I see the diary, Mr. Steele?" He hesitated, then handed it over, his eyes curious. "Be my guest, Miss Marple, but it's clear what's going on." She took the diary, her fingers gentle on the worn leather. The pages were filled with Edward's neat handwriting, dates, thoughts, plans. But as she read the entries Steele had quoted, she noticed something. The ink was slightly darker, the letters a bit shaky, not quite matching the earlier pages. She ran her finger over the words, feeling the paper. The texture was the same, but the writing, it didn't flow right. She closed the diary, her face mild. "Very interesting," she said. "Edward seems troubled, but I wonder, did he write every word himself?" Steele's eyebrows shot up. "What do you mean? It's his diary, his handwriting?" Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Oh, I'm sure it's his diary. But sometimes people add things to make a story look a certain way. In my village, a girl once wrote a note in her sister's book to make it seem she'd run away. The ink gave it away. Too fresh." Steele frowned, taking the diary back. "Handwriting can vary. Stress, maybe. I'll have it analysed, but I doubt it's forged. The facts point to Edward fleeing, love, debt, a secret meeting." Sir Henry nodded, looking convinced. "Sounds right. Poor boy, caught in a mess." Clara made a small noise, like a sob, and slipped out of the room. Miss Marple watched her go, noting the way her shoulders hunched. Rowland snorted, blowing a cloud of smoke. "Told you the boy was foolish. Running off with some girl, probably." Miss Marple said nothing, but her mind was busy. The diary was a big clue, But those shaky letters bothered her. Someone might have added them to point fingers away, or toward something. She needed to know more about Edward's life, his secrets. Steele could chase the diary's words, but she'd chase the people behind them. She excused herself, saying she needed fresh air, and stepped into the hall. The house was quiet, except for the creak of floorboards and the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen. She wandered toward the drawing-room, where she found Clara sitting by the fire, staring at Edward's photograph on the mantel. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. Miss Marple sat beside her, her voice gentle. "You miss him, don't you, dear?" Clara nodded, wiping her eyes. "He's my cousin, but more like a brother. He wouldn't just run away. He loved this place, his uncle, the gardens. That diary, it doesn't sound like him." Miss Marple patted her hand. "Tell me about him. What did he love besides the gardens?" Clara hesitated, then spoke softly. "Books, music, helping people. He was shy but kind. He'd been upset lately, though. Said he'd made a mistake, something about a promise he couldn't keep. I begged him to tell me, but he wouldn't." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she pulled her knitting from her bag. "A promise? That's heavy for a young man. Did he mention anyone else? A friend, maybe, or someone new?" Clara shook her head. "No, but he was writing letters. I saw him seal one addressed to London. He looked so scared. I thought it was about a girl, but now I'm not sure." Miss Marple nodded, her mind threading the clues together. The postmistress had mentioned a thick letter to London, sent a week before Edward vanished. Now Clara confirmed it. And the diaries. Odd writing. Could it be tied to that letter? She remembered a case in St. Mary Mead, where a forged note led her to a jealous sibling. Was someone here playing a similar trick? "Thank you, Clara," she said. "You've been very helpful." Clara gave a small smile and left, her steps heavy. Miss Marple stayed by the fire, her knitting moving steadily. She thought of Steele, so sure of his theory. The diary's words fit his story. Love, debt, escape. But she wasn't convinced. People didn't just run away without leaving more traces. And Edward's kindness, his ties to the estate, those didn't match a man who'd flee. She decided to visit the kitchen, where servants often knew more than they let on. The kitchen was warm, smelling of bread and herbs. Mrs. Poole was there, stirring a pot, while Ellen, the maid, chopped carrots. Miss Marple smiled. "What a cosy place! Mind if I sit?" Mrs. Poole waved her to a stool. "Not at all, miss. Tea?" "Please," Miss Marple said, settling in. "This house must have so many stories. Did Edward spend much time here?" Ellen glanced up, her knife pausing. "Oh, yes. He'd come for tea sometimes, tell us about his books. He was nicer than most." Her voice dropped. "I heard him and Mr. Rowland arguing once in the study. Something about money and a bad choice." Edward sounded upset. Mrs. Poole nodded. "Aye, he was troubled. I found him in the hall one night, looking like he'd seen a ghost. Said he'd let someone down. I told him to rest, but he just shook his head." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind sharp. Money, a bad choice, letting someone down. The diary's entries about debts and a girl could be true, but those shaky letters made her doubt. She thanked the women and left, her thoughts buzzing. Outside she saw Steele returning, his coat dusted with dirt. He waved her over, his face eager. "Miss Marple, I found a witness in the village. A shopkeeper saw a man matching Edward's description near the train station the night he vanished. He was carrying a bag, looking rushed. It fits. Edward was leaving town." Miss Marple nodded politely. "That's promising, Mr. Steele. Did the shopkeeper see anyone with him?" "No, he was alone," Steele said. "I'm checking train records next. He's out there, I'm sure of it." She smiled, but her mind was elsewhere. A man at the station, a torn note, a diary with odd writing. Steele's clues were piling up, but they felt too tidy, like a trail someone wanted followed. She thought of the bill on Sir Henry's desk marked "Overdue." Was money at the heart of this? And who was Edward afraid of? As evening fell, the house grew quiet. Miss Marple sat in her room, her notebook open. She wrote, "Diary, shaky writing, possible forgery. Clara says Edward wouldn't run. Letter to London, important. Argument with Roland, money, witness. At station, too convenient." She closed the book, her mind weaving the threads. She heard a soft creak outside her door again, like the night before. She froze, listening. Silence followed, but her heart beat faster. Someone was moving in the dark, and she was sure it wasn't just the house settling. The puzzle was growing, and she was closer to the truth. Tomorrow she'd pull another thread. Chapter 5. A twist in the tail miss. Marple sat by the window in her room at Hawthorne Hall, the morning light casting soft shadows on the floor. The house was quiet, save for the distant clink of breakfast dishes. Her knitting lay untouched, her mind busy with the puzzle of Edward Grayson's disappearance. The torn letter, the locked diary with its odd handwriting, the single glove, and now Victor Steele's witness who saw Edward at the train station. It all pointed to a young man running away. But Miss Marple's instincts, honed by years of village gossip, told her the story was too neat, like a scarf knitted to hide a mistake. She sipped her tea, thinking of Clara's tearful eyes, Mrs. Poole's nervous hands, and Mr. Rowland's gruff words about Edward's foolishness. The diary's entries about a secret love and debts fit Steele's theory. But those shaky letters nagged at her, and the creak outside her door last night. Someone was watching, or hiding something. She needed to dig deeper, to find the human threads behind the clues. Downstairs, the dining room buzzed with tension. Sir Henry stood by the fireplace, his face lined with worry. Clara picked at her toast, her eyes red. Mr. Rowland read a newspaper, muttering about the stock market. Victor Steele burst in, his coat damp from the morning mist, his face lit with excitement. "Sir Henry," he called, "I've got news, a big break in the case." Miss Marple set her cup down, her ears sharp. Steele pulled a folded paper from his pocket and spread it on the table. "I checked the train station records, as planned. A ticket clerk remembers selling a ticket to London the night Edward vanished. The man matched Edward's description. Tall, dark hair, carrying a small bag. And this." He held up a grainy photograph, printed from a station camera. "It's blurry, but it's him. He was alone, looking nervous." Sir Henry leaned over, his eyes wide. "That's Edward! My boy! He really left?" Clara gasped, dropping her fork. "No, he wouldn't. He loved this place." Her voice broke, and she covered her face. Rowland snorted, folding his paper. "Told you. Boys run off, probably chasing some silly dream. Waste of our time." Miss Marple watched them all, her face calm, but her mind racing. The photograph was convincing, and Steele's confidence was hard to ignore. He was building a strong case. Edward in trouble, fleeing to London. But she noticed Clara's quick tears and Roland's dismissive tone. And that ticket clerk's story. Why did it feel so perfect, like a puzzle piece cut to fit? "Mr. Steele," she said, her voice soft, "that's fine work. Did the clerk see anyone else with Edward, or hear him say anything?" Steele shook his head. No, he was alone. Didn't speak, just paid and left. The ticket was one way, which fits my theory. He was escaping, maybe from debts or that secret romance in the diary. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes twinkling. Very thorough. I wonder, though, did Edward seem like someone who'd leave without a word? Clara, you knew him best. What do you think? Clara looked up, her hands trembling. He wouldn't. He was upset, yes, but he cared about Uncle Henry, about this house. He'd have told me if he was leaving. I know it. Steele raised an eyebrow. People under pressure do strange things, Miss Grayson. The evidence, diary, letter, glove, now, this photo, points to him running. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Evidence is important, Mr. Steele, but so are people's hearts. I'd like to talk to the household again, if I may, Sir Henry. Of course, Sir Henry said, his voice heavy. Anything to find my nephew. Miss Marple finished her tea and slipped out, her steps light but purposeful. Steele's clues were piling up, but they felt like a trail someone had laid on purpose. She remembered a case in St. Mary Mead, where a missing baker left a note saying he'd gone to sea. Everyone believed it until she noticed the note's ink was too fresh. The baker's brother had written it to cover a theft. Was someone here doing the same? She headed to the servants' quarters, where the air smelled of soap and starch. Ellen, the young maid, was folding linens, her movements quick and nervous. Miss Marple smiled. Ellen, you're so busy. Mind if I chat while you work? Ellen blushed, nodding. Not at all, miss. You mentioned Edward arguing with Mr. Roland about money, Miss Marple said, her voice gentle. Did you ever hear Edward talk about leaving? Maybe to London? Ellen shook her head. No, miss. He loved it here. But he was scared the last week. I saw him in the garden talking to himself. Said something about fixing a mistake and not letting them win. I didn't know what he meant. Miss Marple's needles clicked as she pulled out her knitting. That's helpful, dear. Did he ever mention a girl or a business deal? No, but he was writing a lot, Ellen said. I saw him in the study, sealing letters. One had a red seal, fancy-like. He hid it when he saw me. Miss Marple nodded, her mind threading the clues. A red-sealed letter, maybe the one the postmistress mentioned. Edward scared, fixing a mistake. It matched Clara's story of his worries, but not Steele's idea of a runaway. She thanked Ellen and moved on, her thoughts buzzing. Outside, the gardens were quiet. The frost melted under a weak sun. She spotted Tom, the gardener, raking leaves. "Morning, Tom," she called. "Any more thoughts about Edward?" Tom leaned on his rake, his face thoughtful. "Aye, miss. Been thinking. The night he vanished, I was locking the shed. Heard a noise near the back gate, like voices, low and quick. I looked, but no one was there. Could have been Edward, But I'm not sure. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Voices? That's interesting. Did you tell Mr. Steele? Tom shrugged. He didn't ask. He was too busy with his magnifying glass, poking at the dirt. She smiled. Steele was chasing footprints, but she was chasing whispers. Voices at the gate suggested Edward wasn't alone. Was he meeting someone? Or was he taken? She thanked Tom and walked toward the back gate, her eyes scanning the ground. The gravel was disturbed, but no clear prints stood out. Steele's footprints from yesterday were there, but nothing else. Still, Tom's story added a new thread. Back in the house, she found Mrs. Poole in the pantry, counting jars. Mrs. Poole? Miss Marple said. You've been so kind. Did Edward ever seem like he'd run away? Mrs. Poole shook her head. Not him. He was loyal to Sir Henry. But he was in a state those last days. I found him in the hall once, holding a letter with a red seal. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Said, "It's all wrong. I have to stop it." I thought he meant a family row. Miss Marple's mind clicked. Another mention of a red-sealed letter. And stop it. What? A deal, a betrayal. She thanked Mrs. Poole and returned to the drawing room, where Sir Henry sat alone, staring at Edward's photograph. Sir Henry, she said softly. Did Edward ever talk about trouble? Maybe a promise he couldn't keep? Sir Henry sighed. He was quiet lately. Said once he'd made a bad choice, something about a friend who let him down. I thought it was just young man's worries. Now I wonder. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts spinning. A bad choice, a friend, a letter. The diary's shaky writing came back to her. What if Edward hadn't run? What if someone wanted it to look that way? She thought of Steele's witness and photo. Too perfect, too easy. She needed to see that station herself. She slipped on her coat and walked to the village, the air sharp with autumn chill. The train station was small, with a single platform and a ticket booth. The clerk, a thin man with glasses, looked up as she approached. "Morning, ma'am. You the lady with that detective fellow?" Miss Marple smiled. "I'm just curious. You saw a young man here the night Edward Grayson vanished?" The clerk nodded. "Aye, tall lad, dark hair. Bought a ticket to London, one way. Looked in a hurry, kept checking his watch. Did he say anything?" she asked. "Not a word. Paid and left. Saw him on the platform, alone." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "Alone? No one spoke to him?" "Not that I saw," the clerk said. "It was late, quiet night. Thanked him and stepped onto the platform, her mind working." The clerk's story matched Steele's, but it felt rehearsed, like a line someone had fed him. And no one else saw Edward. In St. Mary Mead, someone always noticed something. She glanced at the station camera, high on a pole. Steele's photo was blurry, but it was enough to convince Sir Henry. Too convenient, she thought. Back at the estate, she found Steele in the library, scribbling notes. "Miss Marple," he said, "the case is nearly solved. Edward bought a ticket left alone. He's in London hiding. I'll head there tomorrow to track him." She nodded, her face polite. "You've been thorough, Mr. Steele, but I wonder, what if Edward didn't leave? What if someone made it look that way?" Steele laughed a sharp sound. "With respect, Miss Marple, the evidence is clear. Diary, letter, glove, witness, photo. He ran." She smiled, her eyes steady. "Perhaps, but people can be clever at hiding the truth." I'll keep looking here if you don't mind." As night fell, Miss Marple sat in her room, her notebook open. She wrote, "Station witness, too perfect. Red sealed letter, key? Voices at gate, not alone. Diary, forged entries." She closed the book, her heart racing. Edward wasn't gone, she felt it. He was closer than anyone thought, and someone was weaving a lie to keep him hidden. Chapter 6. The human element Miss Marple sat in her room at Hawthorne Hall, the morning light filtering through the curtains. The house was still, but her mind buzzed like a busy hive. Edward Grayson's disappearance was a puzzle with too many pieces: Steele's train station witness, the diary's shaky handwriting, the red-sealed letter, and those voices Tom the gardener heard at the back gate. Victor Steele was sure Edward had fled to London, chasing a girl or escaping debts. But Miss Marple's instincts, sharpened by years in St. Mary Mead, told her Edward was closer than anyone thought. Someone was weaving a clever lie, and she was determined to unravel it. She sipped her tea, her knitting untouched on the table. Last night's creak outside her door lingered in her mind. Someone moving in the dark, hiding something. The diary's forged entries, Clara's tears, Roland's, grumpiness and Ellen's nervous chatter all pointed to a truth buried in the human heart. Steele could chase his footprints and photos, but she'd chase the people, their fears, their secrets. She dressed in her neat tweed skirt and lace cap, then headed downstairs. The dining room was empty, the breakfast dishes cleared. She found Sir Henry in the library, staring at a stack of papers, his face heavy with worry. "Miss Marple," he said, looking up. "Any news? Steele's off to London today. Certain Edward's there." Miss Marple smiled gently. "He's thorough, Sir Henry, but I'm not sure Edward left. May I look around the house? Sometimes small things tell big stories." "Of course," he said, waving a hand. "Explore anywhere you like." She thanked him and wandered toward the upper floors, her steps quiet on the creaky stairs. The house was a maze of halls and rooms, each one grand but heavy with secrets. She passed Edward's bedroom, already searched by Steele, and noticed a faint scuff on the floor near a bookcase. She paused, her eyes sharp. The scuff was fresh, like someone had moved something heavy. She ran her fingers along the bookcase, feeling for a catch, but found nothing. Still, she noted it. Small things mattered. Next, she climbed to the attic, a dusty space filled with trunks and old furniture. The air smelled of mothballs and time. She moved slowly, her eyes scanning for anything out of place. In a corner, under a pile of blankets, she found a small wooden box, its lid carved with roses. Her heart quickened. She opened it and found a single letter, folded tightly, sealed with red wax. The seal was broken, but the address read, "Mr. J. Harrow, London." She slipped the letter into her pocket, her mind racing. This was the red-sealed letter Ellen and Mrs. Poole had mentioned, the one Edward hid. Why was it here, hidden in the attic? She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a hidden letter revealed a blackmail scheme. Was Edward caught in something similar? She needed to read it, but not here. Someone might be watching. Downstairs, she found Clara in the drawing room, knitting a scarf, her hands shaky. Miss Marple sat beside her, her voice soft. "Clara, dear, You've been so worried. Did Edward ever mention a Mr. Harrow in London?" Clara's needles stopped, her eyes wide. "Harrow?" "Yes. Edward said he was a businessman, someone he trusted, but he was angry about him, said Harrow had lied. I didn't understand. It was about money, I think." Miss Marple nodded, her mind threading the clues. "Thank you, dear. You're helping more than you know." Clara's words matched the letter's address. Harrow was key, but how? She patted Clara's hand and left, her thoughts spinning. In the kitchen, Mrs. Poole was kneading dough, her face flushed. Miss Marple smiled. "You make the best tea, Mrs. Poole. Did Edward ever talk about a Mr. Harrow?" Mrs. Poole wiped her hands, her eyes darting. "Once, miss. He was in the study, on the telephone. I heard him say Harrow, and you can't do this." He sounded scared, slammed the phone down. "I didn't ask. It wasn't my place." Miss Marple's heart beat faster. "You've a good memory. Did you ever hear noises in the house? Late at night, maybe from the attic?" Mrs. Poole frowned. "Now you mention it, yes. A few nights before Edward vanished, I heard thumps up there. Thought it was mice, but maybe not." Miss Marple thanked her and stepped outside, her mind buzzing. Thumps in the attic, a hidden letter. Edward's fear of Harrow. The pieces were forming a picture, but it wasn't clear yet. She walked to the back gate, where Tom had heard voices. The gravel was still disturbed, but she noticed something new. A tiny thread of blue cloth caught on a bush. She plucked it, tucking it into her handkerchief. It was small, but in St. Mary Mead a thread once led her to a thief's coat. She returned to the house, her eyes catching a shadow moving in an upstairs window. Someone was watching her. Roland, perhaps, or Ellen. She kept her face calm, but her senses were sharp. At lunch, the dining room was tense. Sir Henry picked at his food, Clara was silent, and Roland grumbled about the soup. Steele was gone, chasing his London lead. Miss Marple ate quietly, listening. After lunch, she slipped into the study where Edward had argued with Roland. The room was tidy, with a desk, bookshelves, and a locked cabinet. She noticed a faint scratch on the cabinet's lock, like someone had tried to open it. She thought of the attic letter. Had Edward hidden something else? She needed to see that. Cabinet's contents, but not now. Eyes were everywhere. She found Ellen in the hall, polishing a mirror. "Ellen," she said softly, "you're so careful with your work. Did you ever see Edward with a blue coat or scarf?" Ellen paused, her cloth slowing. "Yes, miss. He had a blue scarf, wore it often. I haven't seen it since he left." Her voice shook, and she looked away. Miss Marple nodded, her mind clicking. The blue thread, Edward's scarf. Had he been at the gate, or was it someone else? She thanked Ellen and returned to her room, pulling out the letter. She opened it carefully, her hands steady. It was written in Edward's neat hand, dated a week before he vanished. "Dear Mr. Harrow, I trusted you, but your demands are too much. I won't let you ruin us. I've told them everything, and I'll stop you. E.g., Miss Marple's breath caught. Edward was fighting someone, Harrow, who wanted money or worse. Told them everything. Who? The family? The police? And why hide the letter?" She tucked it back into her pocket, her heart racing. Edward hadn't run. He was scared, trying to fix something big. She remembered Tom's voices at the gate, Mrs. Poole's attic thumps. What if Edward was still here, hidden? The house was huge, full of nooks and crannies. She thought of a St. Mary Mead case, where a missing boy was found in a cellar, locked away by a greedy uncle. Was Roland involved? His anger, his talk of Edward's foolishness, it felt like a mask. She went to the drawing-room, where Sir Henry sat alone. "Sir Henry," she said, "did Edward ever mention trouble with a business deal? Maybe with a Mr. Harrow?" Sir Henry's face paled. "Harrow? Yes. A businessman Edward met in London. They were working on something. A loan, I think. Edward said it went wrong, but he'd handle it. I didn't press him." Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving. Harrow, debts, a hidden letter. She needed to check the attic again, and that cabinet. But first, she'd watch the family at dinner. People let things slip when they thought no one was listening. At dinner, the mood was heavy. Clara barely spoke. Roland snapped at the maid, and Sir Henry looked lost. Miss Marple ate her roast, her ears open. Roland mentioned a business trip to London, his voice too loud. Clara dropped her glass, apologizing quickly. Ellen served dessert, her hands trembling. Miss Marple noticed it all, her mind like a net, catching every detail. After dinner, she slipped upstairs, her steps quiet. The attic door was heavy, but she pushed it open, her candle casting flickering shadows. She searched again, moving trunks and checking corners. Under a dusty rug, she found a loose floorboard. Her heart pounded as she pried it up. Beneath was a small bundle, a blue scarf, stained with dirt, and a key, small and brass. She stared, her thoughts racing. The scarf was Edward's, the key, maybe for the study cabinet. Had he hidden here, or been hidden? She wrapped the bundle in her handkerchief and replaced the floorboard. Her mind set. Tomorrow, she'd open that cabinet and confront the family. The truth was close, and she felt it like a knot about to untie. As she left the attic, she heard another creak below. She froze, her candle steady. Someone was following her, she was sure. She smiled faintly. Let them watch. She was one step ahead, and the human element, fear, greed, love, would lead her to Edward. Chapter 7. The Confrontation. Miss Marple stood in her room at Hawthorne Hall, the morning sun casting a golden glow on the walls. Her heart beat fast, but her face was calm as she tucked the blue scarf and brass key into her knitting bag. The scarf, Edward Grayson's, stained with dirt, and the key found hidden in the attic were the threads she needed to unravel the mystery. The red-sealed letter to Mr. Harrow, Edward's fear, the forged diary entries, and the voices at the back gate all pointed to one truth. Edward hadn't run away. He was here, hidden, and someone was lying to keep it that way. She smoothed her tweed skirt and pinned her lace cap, her mind sharp as a needle. Victor Steele was in London, chasing his train station lead, certain Edward had fled. But Miss Marple knew better. In St. Mary Mead, she'd learned that people's secrets, greed, fear, or shame, were the real clues. Tonight at dinner, she'd pull the final thread and reveal the truth. Downstairs, the house was quiet, the air heavy with secrets. She slipped into the study, where the locked cabinet had caught her eye yesterday. The brass key fit perfectly, clicking as it turned. Inside she found papers, bills marked overdue, letters from Mr. Harrow demanding payment, and a contract signed by Edward and Roland. Her eyes narrowed. The contract was for a business deal, but the terms were harsh, favouring Harrow. A note in Roland's handwriting read, "Pay or lose everything." Miss Marple's breath caught. Roland, Edward's grumpy uncle, was tangled in this. She tucked a letter into her pocket and closed the cabinet, her mind racing. Roland's anger, his dismissal of Edward as foolish, and his talk of a London trip, it all fit. He'd argued with Edward about money, and now this contract showed why. Had Roland forged the diary to make it look like Edward ran? And the attic scarf. Had Edward been hidden there? Or worse, she needed to test her theory. She found Sir Henry in the library, his face pale as he sorted papers. "Miss Marple," he said, "any hope? Steele's in London, but I'm losing faith." She smiled gently. "I've found something, Sir Henry. Can you gather everyone's in the drawing-room tonight after dinner? I'd like to share what I know." His eyes widened. "You've solved it." "Not quite," she said, her voice soft. "But I'm close. Trust me." Sir Henry nodded, his face hopeful. Miss Marple spent the day watching the household. Clara was quiet, twisting her scarf. Ellen, the maid, dropped a tray, her hands shaky. Roland was louder than usual, complaining about the cold. Miss Marple listened, her knitting needles clicking, catching every nervous glance. People always showed their guilt, if you knew where to look. At dinner, the dining room sparkled with candlelight, but the mood was tense. Sir Henry sat at the head. Clara picked at her food, and Roland drank too much wine, his face red. Ellen served silently, her eyes darting. Miss Marple ate her soup, her mind weaving the final pieces. The red-sealed letter, the scarf, the contract, the forged diary. They all pointed to Roland. After dessert, Sir Henry stood. "Friends," he said, "Miss Marple has something to say. Let's move to the drawing-room." The group shuffled in, settling on velvet chairs by the fire. The photograph of Edward with his shy smile watched from the mantel. Miss Marple stood, her small figure straight, her voice calm but firm. "Thank you, Sir Henry. I've been thinking about Edward, and I believe he's not in London. He's here, in this house." Clara gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Roland snorted, his cigar puffing smoke. "Nonsense," he said. "The boy ran off. Steele proved it." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Mr. Steele found clues, a torn letter, a glove, a train ticket, a photo. They tell a story of Edward fleeing. But I found other clues in people's words and actions. She pulled the red-sealed letter from her pocket. This was hidden in the attic. Edward wrote to Mr. Harrow, saying he'd stop him from ruining the family. Harrow was pressing for money, wasn't he, Mr. Roland? Roland's face darkened. "What are you implying, old woman?" She held up the blue scarf. "This is Edward's, found under an attic floorboard, with a key to the study cabinet. There, I found a contract you signed with Harrow, Mr. Roland. It was a bad deal, and Edward wanted to stop it. You argued with him, didn't you?" Clara's eyes widened. "Uncle Roland, is that true?" Roland slammed his hand on the chair. "Lies. Edward was a fool, borrowing money we couldn't pay. He ran to save himself." Miss Marple's voice stayed soft. "But the diary, Mr. Rowland, the entries about a girl and debts, shaky handwriting, different ink. Someone added them to make us think Edward fled, and Ellen heard you arguing with him about money. Mrs. Poole heard thumps in the attic. Tom, the gardener, heard voices at the gate. Edward didn't leave. You made it look that way." Sir Henry's face paled. "Rowland, what's she saying?" Rowland stood, his fists clenched. "This is ridiculous. You've no proof." Miss Marple pulled out the contract, her eyes steady. "This shows you owed Harrow thousands. Edward found out and threatened to tell. You couldn't let him ruin your plan, so you hid him. Where is he, Mr. Rowland? In the attic? A cellar?" Clara sobbed, standing. "Tell us, uncle, where's Edward?" Rowland's face twisted, his voice low. "You meddling spinster! You think you're clever?" He lunged toward her, but Sir Henry grabbed his arm. "Enough!" Sir Henry roared. "Tell us the truth, Rowland." Rowland slumped, his face grey. "Fine," he muttered. "Edward's in the old wine cellar, locked in. I didn't hurt him, just kept him quiet. Harrow was bleeding us dry. Edward was going to ruin everything by telling the police." Clara cried out, running from the room. Sir Henry followed, shouting for the butler. Miss Marple stayed calm, her knitting in her hands. "We should find Edward," she said softly. They rushed to the cellar, a damp stone room hidden behind the kitchen. Sir Henry unlocked a heavy door, and there was Edward, pale, thin, but alive, sitting on a cot. Clara threw her arms around him, sobbing. "You're safe!" she cried. Edward's voice was weak. "Rowland, he locked me here, said it was for the family. I'm sorry, Uncle Henry." Sir Henry hugged him, tears in his eyes. "My boy, you're back. That's all that matters." Miss Marple watched, her heart warm. The puzzle was solved, not with footprints or photos, but with the human threads. Rowland's greed, Clara's love, Edward's courage. She slipped the scarf and letter back into her bag, her work done. Later, in the drawing-room, Sir Henry thanked her. "Miss Marple, you're a wonder. Steele's still in London, chasing shadows. How did you know?" She smiled, her needles clicking. "People tell stories, Sir Henry, in their words and silences. I just listen. In my village, I've seen greed and fear before. They're the same everywhere." As they spoke, the door opened, and Victor Steele walked in, his face tired. "Sir Henry, I found nothing in London. The trail's cold." He saw Edward and froze. "What? He's here?" Sir Henry explained, and Steele's eyes widened. He turned to Miss Marple, his voice grudging but impressed. "You were right. I followed the evidence, but you saw the people. I underestimated you." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "You're very clever, Mr. Steele. But sometimes the heart leads where facts can't." Steele nodded, a small smile breaking through. "I'll remember that, Miss Marple." The police arrived, taking Rowland away. Edward, weak but safe, told his story. How Rowland had tricked him into the cellar, forging the diary to cover his tracks. The train station witness had been paid to lie, part of Rowland's plan. Miss Marple listened, her mind at ease. The truth was out, the knot untied. As the fire crackled, she felt a quiet joy. She'd come to Hawthorne Hall to solve a puzzle, not to outshine anyone. but she'd shown that her way, watching, listening, understanding, could find what logic missed. She picked up her knitting, ready for a rest, but her sharp eyes still watched, just in case another secret stirred. Chapter 8. What Makes Her Smarter? Miss Marple sat in the drawing-room of Hawthorne Hall, the fire casting a warm glow on the velvet chairs and polished wood. The air smelled of wood smoke and tea, and the room was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock. Edward Grayson, pale but safe, sat wrapped in a blanket, sipping broth. Clara, his cousin, hovered nearby, her eyes still red from tears, but now bright with relief. Sir Henry stood by the mantel, his face a mix of joy and exhaustion, the photograph of Edward's shy smile watching over them. The mystery was solved, the knot untied, and Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction, like finishing a perfect row of knitting. Victor Steele stood near the window, his sharp face softer than usual. He'd returned from London empty-handed, his train station lead a dead end, and now he watched Miss Marple with a mix of respect and curiosity. The police had taken Roland away, his greed exposed as the reason for Edward's imprisonment in the wine cellar. Miss Marple's discovery of the red-sealed letter, the blue scarf, and the forged diary had cracked the case, proving Edward never left the estate. Her method, watching people, catching their hidden truths, had outshone Steele's hunt for clues. Sir Henry turned to her, his voice warm. "Miss Marple, I can't thank you enough. You brought my nephew back. How did you do it? Steele had all those facts, the ticket, the photo, the diary." Miss Marple smiled, her knitting needles clicking softly in her lap. "Facts are important, Sir Henry, but people tell the real story. In my village, St. Mary Mead, I've learned to listen, to nervous hands, quick glances, words left unsaid. Roland's anger, Clara's tears, Ellen's shaky voice. They showed me Edward was still here." Steele stepped forward, his hands in his pockets. "I owe you an apology, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low but clear. "I thought my way, evidence, logic, was enough. The glove, the torn letter, the witness, they all pointed to Edward running. But you saw what I missed. How?" Her eyes twinkled, kind but sharp. "You're very clever, Mr. Steele, like Mr. Sherlock Holmes in those stories. You find footprints and papers, and that's good. But I look at hearts." Roland's grumpiness hid guilt. Clara's love for Edward told me he wouldn't leave her. The diary's shaky writing wasn't Edward's. It was Roland's trick. People can't hide who they are, not really. Steele nodded, a small smile breaking through. "Holmes would have liked you, I think. He called human nature elementary. But you see it deeper. I chased the trail Roland laid, but you saw through it." Miss Marple chuckled softly. "Oh, I'm no match for Mr. Holmes. I just know what I've seen in my little village. Greed, fear, love, they're the same everywhere, whether it's a cottage or a grand house like this." Edward looked up, his voice weak but grateful. "Miss Marple, you saved me. Roland, he said it was for the family, but it was for his deal with Harrow. I found out he was borrowing money we couldn't pay. I wrote to Harrow, said I'd tell the police. That's when Roland locked me up." Clara hugged him, tears falling. "I knew you didn't run. I told them." Sir Henry shook his head, his face heavy. "My own brother. I never thought Roland would go so far. That contract you found, Miss Marple, it showed he was desperate. Harrow was squeezing us, and Roland thought hiding Edward would buy time." Miss Marple nodded, her needles moving steadily. He forged the diary, paid the ticket clerk, planted the glove and letter. He wanted us to think Edward fled. But small things gave him away. Ellen hearing your argument, Mrs. Poole's attic thumps, Tom's voices at the gate. And that scarf. In the attic it was Edward's proof he was close. Steele rubbed his chin. "I should have listened to the servants more. I was too busy with the station camera and train records. You were right about that witness, paid to lie. I checked today. He admitted it." Miss Marple's smile was gentle. "We each see different pieces, Mr. Steele. Your clues helped too. They made Roland think his plan was working, so he got careless." Sir Henry poured tea, his hands shaking slightly. "You're a marvel, Miss Marple. Will you stay a few days? We'd love to have you." She shook her head, her voice kind. "Thank you, Sir Henry, but my village is calling. I've roses to tend and neighbours to visit. Besides, you're all safe now." Clara hugged her, her voice soft. "You're like family now. Thank you for believing in Edward." Miss Marple patted her cheek. "You believed in him first, dear. That's what helped most." As the afternoon faded, the house felt lighter, like a storm had passed. Edward rested. Clara stayed by his side, and Sir Henry began sorting the financial mess Roland had left. Steele sat with Miss Marple, asking about her village cases. She shared a story about a missing grocer, solved by a neighbour's gossip, and he laughed, shaking his head. "You make it sound so simple," he said. "It's never simple," she replied, "but it's always human. A kind word, a guilty look. Those are my magnifying glass." Steele leaned back, thoughtful. "I've got gadgets and logic, but I'll try your way next time. Maybe we could work together some day." Her eyes twinkled. "Perhaps, Mr. Steele. Mysteries do find me." As evening settled, Miss Marple packed her small suitcase, folding her cardigan and tea tin carefully. The house was calm now. The secrets spilled. She thought of Roland's greed, how it twisted him to betray his own nephew. In St. Mary Mead she'd seen it before. A farmer hiding stolen money. A wife covering a lie. People were the same, whether in a village or a grand estate. She glanced at her notebook where she'd written, "Red letter, Harrow's threat, scarf, Edward's attic, forged diary, Roland's trick, voices, thumps, truth in the house." She smiled, closing it. The puzzle was solved, not with a microscope, but with her quiet way of watching. At dinner, the mood was brighter. Edward joined them, looking stronger, and Clara laughed for the first time in days. Sir Henry raised a glass. "To Miss Marple, our hero." She blushed, waving a hand. "Oh, I'm no hero, just an old lady who likes a good puzzle." Tyloo raised his glass too. "To puzzles, then, and to learning from each other." After dinner, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting in her hands. The flames danced and she felt content. She hadn't come to outshine Steele or prove herself smarter than Sherlock Holmes. She'd come to find Edward, and she had. Her way, listening, understanding, had worked. Not better than Steele's, but differently. Together they'd brought the truth to light. As she climbed the stairs to her room, she heard no creaks in the dark. The house was at peace. She slept soundly, dreaming of her roses and St. Mary Mead, where new mysteries always waited. The next morning, a car waited to take her to the station. Sir Henry, Clara, and Edward waved goodbye, their faces grateful. Steele shook her hand, his grip firm. "I won't forget this, Miss Marple. Safe travels." She smiled, her eyes bright. "Keep watching people, Mr. Steele. They'll surprise you." The car rolled away, Hawthorne Hall fading behind her. She leaned back, her knitting bag at her side, her mind already wandering to her village. The case was closed, but life was full of knots to untie. She was ready for the next one. Epilogue. Back to St. Mary. Mead Miss Jane Marple sat in her cosy parlour in St. Mary Mead, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. The familiar smell of lavender and warm tea filled the air, and her roses peeked through the window, their petals bright against the grey November sky. Her knitting needles clicked in a steady rhythm, a half-finished scarf growing in her lap. It was only a day since she'd returned from Hawthorne Hall, but the grand estate, with its secrets and shadows, felt like a dream. Here, in her small cottage with its creaky stairs and rose-patterned curtains, she was home. She sipped her tea, her sharp blue eyes resting on a letter that had arrived that morning. The envelope was cream, sealed with red wax, just like the one she'd found in the attic at Hawthorne Hall, but this one was addressed to her, in a neat, bold hand. She smiled, her fingers tracing the seal. It was from Victor Steele, the detective who'd reminded her so much of Sherlock Holmes. She set her cup down and opened the letter, curious. "Dear Miss Marple," it began, "I'm still in awe of how you solved the Grayson case. I was so sure Edward had fled to London, chasing my clues, ticket, photo, diary. But you saw the truth in people's hearts, where I saw only facts. I'm back in London now, working a new case, but I'd be honoured to collaborate with you some day. Your village wisdom is sharper than any magnifying glass. Yours, Victor Steele." Miss Marple's lips curved in a small smile. She liked Steele, with his crisp suit and quick mind. He was clever, like the Holmes she'd read about, piecing together puzzles with footprints and scraps of paper. But at Hawthorne Hall, she'd shown him another way. Listening to Clara's tears, catching Roland's guilty scowl, hearing the fear in Edward's hidden letter. She hadn't meant to outshine him, only to find the truth. And she had. She leaned back, her needles moving steadily. The case played through her mind like a story. Edward, locked in the wine cellar by his greedy Uncle Roland, who'd forged a diary to make it look like he'd run. The red-sealed letter to Mr. Harrow, proving Edward's fight to save his family. The blue scarf, hidden in the attic, whispering he was near. And the voices, thumps and nervous glances that told her more than any train ticket could. In St. Mary Mead, she'd solved mysteries the same way, watching, listening, understanding the human heart. She thought of Clara, so relieved to have Edward back, and Sir Henry, free from Roland's schemes. Even Ellen, the nervous maid, had smiled as Miss Marple left, pressing a small cake into her hands as thanks. The house was at peace now, its secrets spilled. Miss Marple felt a quiet glow, like finishing a tricky stitch. Her eyes wandered to her bookshelf, where the adventures of Sherlock Holmes sat, its spine worn from reading. She'd always liked Holmes, with his clever tricks and sharp logic. But she knew something he didn't, that people's feelings, their small lies and loves, were the real clues. Steele had learned that too, at least a little. His letter proved it. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Lily, her rosy-cheeked maid, carrying a tray of scones. "Miss Marple, you're back," Lily said, her eyes bright. "Was London exciting? Did you meet any villains?" Miss Marple chuckled, setting her knitting aside. "Oh, Lily, it was quite a puzzle. A young man was missing, but I found him, safe and sound. No villains, just people making mistakes." Lily's eyes widened. "You're like a detective in a book. Will you go on more adventures?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her smile warm. "If a mystery finds me, I won't say no. But I'm happy here with my roses and my neighbours." Lily set the scones down and scurried off, humming. Miss Marple took a scone, its warmth comforting. She thought of Steele's offer to work together. Maybe one day she'd join him for another case, blending her village wisdom with his city logic. But for now, St. Mary Mead was enough. Its quiet streets hid their own secrets. A lost cat, a stolen pie, a neighbour's odd glance. Each was a knot to untie, and she loved them all. She picked up Steele's letter again, her mind drifting. At Hawthorne Hall she'd faced a challenge. Prove her way was smarter than Sherlock's. She hadn't set out to win, only to help. But in the end her way had worked, not because she was cleverer than Steele or Holmes, but because she saw what they missed. The flicker of guilt in Roland's eyes, the love in Clara's voice, the fear in Edward's words. Those were her tools, sharper than any gadget. She rose, crossing to her desk where her notebook lay. She flipped it open, reading her final notes. Roland, greed, forged diary. Clara, love for Edward, letter scarf, truth in the house. She smiled, closing it. The case was done, but her mind was already open to the next puzzle. In St. Mary Mead there was always something. A whisper, a worry, a secret waiting to be found. Outside the village was waking. The postman waved as he passed, and Mrs. Baker called from her garden, asking about her trip. Miss Marple stepped onto her porch, the air crisp with autumn. Her roses needed pruning, and she'd promised to visit Dolly for tea. Life was simple here, but never dull. People were the same everywhere, full of hopes and fears, and she knew how to read them. She thought of Edward's shy smile in the photograph, now safe with his family. She thought of Roland, led away by the police, his greed, his downfall. And she thought of Steele, learning to look beyond his magnifying glass. The world was full of mysteries, big and small, and she was ready for them, with her knitting and her sharp eyes. As she clipped a rose, her fingers gentle, she heard a car rumble by. For a moment she imagined another letter arriving, another invitation to a grand house or a city puzzle. She smiled. If it came, she'd go, not to prove anything, but because mysteries were like her roses. They needed care to bloom true. She returned to her parlour, the fire warm, and settled into her chair. Her needles clicked again, the scarf growing longer. The letter from Steele lay on the table, a reminder of the world beyond her village. She'd write back, polite but simple, thanking him and leaving the door open. Maybe they'd meet again, two detectives with different paths solving puzzles together. For now, though, St. Mary Mead was her world. She'd solved the Hawthorne Hall case not by being smarter than Sherlock, but by being herself, Jane Marple, who saw the truth in quiet moments and human hearts. And that, she thought, was enough.